Here is how to make the Simplicity Sewing Patterns S3064. You just need your main fabric. This is a stretch knit, and then a lining fabric for the built-in bra, some thread, and then some elastic minus 1/4 inch. And first you're just going to pre-wash your fabric. This is an important step so that you don't get the fit down perfectly and then it shrinks after you wash it. So pre-washing your fabric is always a good tip. And then lay this out on the fold, which just means that it is folded over in half lengthwise so that there's 2 layers of fabric, and then laying down my pattern pieces. One piece is on the fold, so it goes up to the folded edge, and the other one is just next to it, so I'll get 2 pieces there. And then laying down my pattern weights and cutting this out. I did slightly adjust this pattern only because I am pregnant, and so I added a little extra width to the waist area for my bump, but other than that I followed the pattern exactly. I did choose the longest length, so I had a nice summer maxi dress, but there are different lengths to this pattern, which I love, so you can customize it how you'd like. And then I just cut the whole pattern out. These will be your front and back pieces. And then removing my pattern weights, here is what I'm left with. There will be 2 back pieces and then 1 front piece. It's just folded over. And for the first step after cutting, I'm taking my sewing clips. I prefer these over pins personally, but up to you. And actually, I need to cut my binding. So this pattern does come with binding that will finish the edges of the neckline very nicely and be the straps. So cutting those out. And just taking my time here to cut them out all nicely, and then moving over with my clips now to clip down the back center. So the back pieces, you'll have 2 with a center seam down the back. So just taking my time to clip this in place, and then just going to sew down that back center seam. I am using my regular sewing machine to do a stretch straight stitch. A stretch stitch is recommended just because this fabric is stretchy. And I'm using my Brother SE2000. I love this machine, highly recommend it, but you can use any sewing machine. And I am using a 5/8 seam allowance and just sewing down that entire seam all the way to the end, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end of my seam. Then I'm going to run that through the serger. I'm using the Brother Air 1800 and just finishing that edge so that the fabric doesn't fray. If you don't have a serger, feel free to use a zigzag stitch or another specialty stitch. Now that you have that back piece sewn together, we are going to lay out our front and back piece. It doesn't matter which one goes on the bottom, but whichever one's on the bottom, put right side up, and then put the other piece on top so that it's right sides together, meaning the pretty part or outside part of the fabric is on the side that's touching the other part. And then I am just going to clip my side seams all the way down. Each side, just taking some time to align it, starting from the top, going to the bottom. And then once both sides are all the way clipped down each side, you can see I'm just taking time to make sure the edge is fully lined up correctly. And then I'm just going to sew down from top to bottom on each side. I am on my regular sewing machine again, using a 5/8 seam allowance and a stretch straight stitch, and just sewing carefully all the way down. And make sure to backstitch at the beginning of your seam as well as the end of the seam so that your stitch stays together nicely. And then going to do the other side as well once I get to the end. And then once I've done both of those, I did move over to my serger and finish it there. I did not record that step accidentally, but make sure to finish all your seams. And next we are grabbing our lining fabric for the built-in bra. You can use the same fabric for the bra and the dress, but I chose to use this just beige lining fabric. It's also a stretch. It has more spandex in it though, but yeah, laying down those pattern pieces for the built-in bra and just cutting here. If you made any adjustments to the top of your dress pattern, like any custom adjustments, you'd want to make these to the bra pieces as well. But I mostly made it to the belly area, so I'm just leaving this as is for now. And cut those pieces out, and then you will have your front and back bra pieces. And here is what they look like. And we are going to follow similar steps as we did for the dress. So taking our clips or pins and sewing the back piece together so that we have that back center seam. Since it's not cut on the fold, you need to attach it. And we're just going to sew right there. Again, using my straight stretch stitch. That's hard to say. And just sewing all the way down, front and back stitching at the beginning and end of this. And then taking the front and back pieces now and laying them on top of each other, right sides together, so that the good side of the fabric is showing or your seam is on the outside. And then just clipping or pinning the side seams again. I'm just using one clip since it's a pretty small area here. And I did serge the back center seam as well to finish my seam. For some reason I kept skipping recording that step. And now 5/8 seam allowance, front and back stitch, all the way down, front and back stitch, and then doing the other side. And then I will be finishing these seams as well on my serger. This time I did record that step. So yeah, just make sure to finish all of your seams. That will keep your dress looking really professional. And now along the bottom band of this built-in bra, I'm just going to use the serger to finish that bottom area. So if you don't have a serger, just zigzag stitch the bottom part of the bra, so not the neckline but underneath, and this will just finish the edge nicely. So I'm just going all the way around, and then I'll tie that off. And now here is what we have. So it should start to resemble a bra, and the bottom band is all finished nicely. And then we are going to fold this over, and I'm folding it over so that my 1/4 inch elastic can fit inside of it. I didn't measure precisely. I believe on the pattern there is an exact measurement they recommend, but I just did it so that it was wide enough to fit that 1/4 inch elastic with a little extra room for my seam. And I just went all the way around and pinned that in place so that it looks like this. And then you're just going to top stitch that down to make a channel for your elastic. Make sure to leave about 2 inches, I recommend, of a hole so that we can thread the elastic through later. But again, I'm just using a stretch straight stitch and going all the way around, leaving a little more than a 1/4 inch of a channel for my elastic to go in, plus a gap of about 2 inches. And then once you do that, we are going to use the elastic cutting guide from the pattern. You can also just measure around your underbust area with your elastic, since everyone's might be a little bit different and you want it to fit you snugly but comfortably. So I am going to use the pattern, but then I would recommend just putting it in around your underbust and making sure it's comfortable. And then I am going to take a safety pin and just pin the end of one side of the elastic, and then thread it through that little opening you left earlier when you made this channel. And then just take your time to push that elastic all the way around. Let me speed this up so you don't have to watch the whole thing. And then when you get to the end, overlap your elastic by about 1/2 inch. So you do want to leave that when you're cutting it, and then I'm just doing a zigzag type of stitch down to secure that elastic to itself and make a full loop band. And then it looks like this with my little, it's kind of a zigzag stitch, not quite, but you can use whatever stitch you want, and then back to a straight stretch stitch and closing that opening you left to thread the elastic through. So just finishing that up. So now my built-in bra is finished, and I'm going to attach it to the dress. So with the dress right side out and the bra inside out, I am going to thread that through, or not thread it through, put it into the dress so that the bra is inside, and then I'm just clipping around the entire neckline, armholes, and back area, and just taking my time to really make sure this is all lined up properly where all of those corners and edges are, so that there's not any weird bunching. And then once I do that, all you need to do is do a basting stitch all the way around, which a basting stitch is essentially just a stitch that holds everything in place for you. And so I'm just using the regular stretch straight stitch. This will be hidden inside of our binding. That will create the nice finish to the edges and the straps of the dress. So this doesn't have to look perfect, and then don't do 5/8 seam allowance for this. Just put it near the edge of the fabric and just sew all the way around, leaving your needle in at the corners of the neckline, and then finishing that up. Moving on to our binding steps. So now you will take, this was cut out in the pattern. Take your binding, I like to fold it in half to get where the center is, and align that back binding center area with the back seam, and then stretching each side to meet the ends of the back neckline. You will need to stretch the binding a little bit and just attach that with a straight stitch. And you do want to stretch this out a little bit. The binding will be smaller than the actual neckline, and that is how it should be. Otherwise, if the binding is the same size, it might look bunchy. So don't be alarmed if you have to stretch. And now here's what it looks like. And we are going to just fold this over twice and clip it in place to create that nice binding look. So take your time to just kind of clip everything down. I don't use precise measurements for this, as you can see, and then we're just going to top stitch that down. So I like to start on the wrong side and then fold it over and top stitch the right side as the second step. You technically could go either way, but I think this has a cleaner finish from the outside, and here's what it looks like. Next, we're going to do the front binding. So again, I'm folding the binding in half to find the center, and then going to fold the neckline in half to find the center. And that way everything will be all evenly spaced. You can see these aren't precise measurements or anything. And then stretching it to the end or the top of the neckline, and then evenly stretching it throughout the rest. Clipping everything in place. And then we're going to follow the same process. Again, I started with the binding on the wrong side of the dress, so on the bra side with the right side touching the bra. And then I'm just doing the stretch straight stitch to attach the binding to that bra side, right side of the binding to the bra. I'm just sewing all the way down. And again, front and back stitch the beginning and end of this seam to keep everything nicely in place, and stretch your binding to fit that full width. And then I just folded it over again to the right side of the dress, so the outside, and then I'm just top stitching that binding down in place. And now I have a nice neckline and back neckline of binding. Looks so clean. It's such a great way to finish your items. Next, I'm taking the armhole binding, and so these are longer pieces, and first just fold them in half, and then we're going to create a full circle for the armhole. And so all we need to do is sew each one of these to make a loop on my regular sewing machine using a stretch straight stitch, 5/8 seam allowance, and just sewing back and forth. I am not going to serge these edges since it may make it bulky. I'm just going to trim them down. These will be inside the binding, so you won't be able to see the edges, so that's why you don't want to add extra bulk with the serger. and then just clipping that, and now we have those loops. So take the seam that you just did and align it with the side seam or armpit seam on the bra side of your dress, right side touching the bra of your the loop strap, and just taking your time. There are markings on the pattern for where the different the top of the neckline and everything is. So again, just stretching everything out so that it aligns perfectly. And that's why I like the clips. I think they're easy to adjust and hold everything in place nicely, but you can use pins as always, but just my personal preference. And then once you do that, we are just going to sew that band to the dress armhole area. So it will just be from the top of the neckband to the top of the back. And then just again, stretch, straight stitch, not 5/8 seam allowance. This is probably closer to 2 or 3/8. And just going all the way from the top of the neckline to the end of the back of the dress. And then once you finish that, backstitch it in place. And now we're doing that same fold over method to create the binding. And so just take your time, fold this over, and clip or pin everything in place. There were a couple bulky areas on my seams, so I did trim some of that back. But yeah, just mostly went around, folded everything, and then folding it onto the armpit area of the dress, as well as the straps of the dress. All you're going to do is fold it over onto itself so it looks like this, and top stitch it all the way around. I'm going to start at the armpit because if there's any bulkiness with the beginning and end of my stitch, it will be hidden under my arm. And then when you get to the straps, see how I folded it over just onto itself and just top stitched it down just to make a really nice clean strap, and then finished again at the armpit. And here's how clean and professional looking your dress straps look. I love the binding method to finish these, and you can use this on all sorts of patterns. And then always remember to press your seams so it looks all nice and professional. And here is the final look. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial.